The House comes to questions for oral answer. Question number 1, in the name of the Honourable Annette King.
Mr Speaker, my questions to the Minister of Health. What was core Crown health expenditure as a percentage of GDP in 2010-11 and what is it in 2015-16?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Mr Speaker, the 2015 financial statements of the Government of New Zealand state that in 2010-11 core Crown health expenditure was 6.7% of GDP, and in 2015-16 it's forecast to be 6.4% of GDP. This government has increased health spending by $4 billion while increasing access to services for all New Zealanders.
Supplementary question,
Order.
Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Well, in light of that answer, does a 0.38% decrease in Crown health expenditure as a percentage of GDP, Mr Joyce, between the 2010-11 and the 2015-16 years equate to $930 million less going into health if the spending level had stayed the same? If so, when will he acknowledge that health expenditure has been cut?
Honourable Dr
What a
Jonathan
silly
Coleman.
question. It quite clearly has not been cut because it's gone up by $4 billion over the term of this government. So you better go and talk to your question writer.
Supplementary question.
Point of order, the Honourable Annette King.
I seek leave to table a parliament... This is a point of order, Mr
And
Speaker.
I want to hear it, please.
I seek leave to table a parliamentary library document dated the 3rd of March 2016, compiled from data from Treasury, which shows exactly what I outlined in terms of core Crown health expenditure.
It may be useful to members. I'll put the lever sought to table that information from Parliamentary Library. Is there any objection? There is none. It can be tabled. Supplementary question, Simon O'Connor.
Thank you. What reports has the Minister seen about the levels of core Crown health expenditure as a percentage of GDP?
Mr Speaker,
Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
I've seen advice that from 2000 to 2008, the average percentage of GDP spent on core Crown health expenditure was 5.7%. That's lower than the average of 6.5% during the term of this government. In fact, Mr Speaker, between 2000 and 2008, core Crown health expenditure as a percentage of GDP never rose above 6%. That's what you call an own goal, Mrs King.
What you call a bigger economy growth under Labor.
Order. The member wishes to raise a supplementary question. Order.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Order. Mr Joyce, that is your final warning for today. The Honourable Annette King.
If there is a real increase in Crown health expenditure, as he claims every week, why have DHB deficits increased by an unplanned $61.5 million year to date, 31st of December 2015?
Well,
the Honourable Dr Jonathan
that's
Coleman.
a big improvement on the $150 million plus they were running at under Labor.
Well, no, I now have a... Have I got a point of order here?
Speaker.
A point of order, the Honourable Annette King.
Mr Speaker, I seek leave to table the Ministry of Health paper entitled DHB Sector Financial Performance Year to Date, 31st of December 2016, setting out the DHB deficits.
We don't need any more. I just need to know whether the document's publicly available. On that basis, I'll put the leave is sought to table it. Order. Honourable Annette King, that is your final warning. The level of interjection and the complaints I'm getting because of the interjection, but particularly between the two front benches, means I have to deal with it. I've given a warning on this side. I've now given the equivalent warning to this member, particularly when I'm on my feet, and I will act on those warnings if I sadly have to. I need to put the leave for those papers. Leave is sought to table those particular papers as described by the Honourable Annette King. Is there any objection? There is none. They can be tabled.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Paula Bennett.
Supplementary, Mr Speaker. I'm wondering if the Minister has seen any reports on who might have actually written this primary question.
Mr Speaker, it's enumerate enough to be Grant Robertson.
Order. That's not a question that's in order. It's not even described as a question. Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Yes.
Order.
Listen to him.
Honourable Annette King.
Thank you, Mr.
I'm
Speaker.
wanting to listen to her.
What is his response to the fact that 5 DHBs have reported they do not have the funding to cover their vital nursing staff wage increase negotiated recently in the NZNO Mecca and increase crucial to retaining their workforce?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the vote health went up by $400 million last year. All DHBs assured me, because they planned well ahead, that they would be able to fund that very excellent pay increase for nurses, and they will be. So don't worry about it.
That's right.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
What impact on patients will Waikato DHB's decision to cut their almost $9 million deficit and growing by not filling over 69 vacancies, which include medical personnel, nursing personnel and allied health?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not worried about Waikato's performance because they have delivered an extra 5,500 operations during the term of this government, an extra 6,600 first specialist appointments. And look, they've had an extra $44 million in budget 2015, an extra $250 million over the term of this government. And actually, they're delivering great services. And that member should actually back the staff there, not constantly try to undermine their morale.
Oh, shucks.
Order.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. Oh, no, point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, point of order, the Honourable Annette King.
I seek leave to table an official information request provided by the Waikato District Health Board, dated the 10th of February 2016, setting out their vacancies.
Leave sought to table that particular OA information from Waikato District Health Board. Is there any objection? There is none. It can be tabled. Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Was he alarmed when he read the Ministry of Health report received by him on the 4th of February, which states that Hutt Valley District Health Board is going to control their growing $5 million deficit through staffing control, and at this stage have 22 vacancies, 10 for nurses, 2 for medical and 5 for allied health?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
I'm actually very pleased with the new CE, my former medical school classmate, Dr Bloomfield, and the fiscal discipline he is bringing to Hutt Valley District Health Board. He's going to make good use of that $76 million extra that the District Health Board has received over the last 7 years, and he's actually making the type of decisions that mean that we can focus on getting more services delivered to the people of Hutt Valley. So he's doing a great job.
Point of order.
Final one,
Order.
Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable Annette King.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I seek leave to table an official information request from the Hutt Valley District Health Board, dated the 4th of February 2016, setting out their vacancies.
Leave sought to table that particular document. Is there any objection? There is none. It can be tabled. Question number